Hello there! Welcome to this little tutorial of Substance 3D Designer in which we get to create some roof tiles pattern / roof that is supposed to look somewhat believable / realistic, and we'll be having some exposed parameters in mind while we are creating this thing. So let's get into it. Let's head over to Substance 3D Designer here and then hit New Substance Graph. Give this a name that makes sense, in this case roof. We don't need to change the parent size because they can always be changed on the fly. The rest is also fine, so just hit OK. So this is the regular preview of everything, including the graph. First thing that I change here, just for performance sake, is I head over to the renderer here and then change this to OpenGL, because I do feel that the rasterizer looks a bit nicer, but it's also quite intense on the CPU. So let's use OpenGL. Do that. Visually, there's almost no change, but it just, I don't know, renders faster. So that's good. Cool. So first thing that we always do is we have some sort of placeholder node. Usually I tend to, I don't know, spawn some sort of shape, and then I feed that into the height map. So the placeholder here can go. Just feed that in. You notice a change immediately. Might be a bit hard to see, but once you move the camera a bit, you might see that there's a bit of a bump now. Just ever so slightly. So if I lower this, well, actually it's barely visible. So in case it doesn't update, you can always hit View Outputs in 3D by hitting right click and then just choosing that. And obviously also we want to see the thing in action. So head over to Materials, Default, Edit Properties. It might say something different if you are on the rasterizer. Then it looks a bit different. It says Default Overridden Edit Properties, but nothing changes tremendously. So Default Edit Properties, and then you come over to Height. So in your case, it might still all be open. You have base surface, you have all the other things, anisotropy, emission, sheen. You can minimize all of that. The only thing we'll ever get to touch is the tiling and the height. So minimize everything but those. And then with the height, we can just bump that up or put in a value, maybe 10. Cool. So now we see some elevation here. It's not beautiful, but, well, it gets the job done for now. Next thing is put that into the normal map, because only combined with the normal map, you get a somewhat decent looking representation. Then you would also bump up the intensity. You can also just dial in a value like 5 and then OpenGL in most cases. And lastly, we want to feed this placeholder shape into an HBAO, so an ambient occlusion converter node, and then put that into the output, and then we have some visual representation. This is obviously not the best preview mesh, if you will. So let's move over to plain high res. It's probably the most useful in most cases, just to see some 3D representation. Cool. So next thing we do is we lower the amount of ambient occlusion because it's way too much by default. So we're talking values of 0.02, 0.03 here. Not much more than that. Because if you think about it, is light really all that obstructed in real life as well when we talk about a simple shape such as this one? Probably not. If you have something like this, then, I don't know, you live in some sort of alternative reality or some black hole. I don't know, makes no sense. So lower it down. The idea is to miss it if it wouldn't be there, but you don't really notice it. Those are the best ambient occlusions. Cool. So first thing we need for the roof tile is to have some sort of tile, some pattern that we can then repeat. So the idea is to have some tile generator later on that will repeat the pattern that we create in the very beginning. So how do we do this? Because if we look at the average tile, especially if we look at references such as Novigrad from The Witcher 3, and we look at some references here, let's get them into the picture here. There. This this is the type of roof tiling that we're talking about. If you zoom in a bit, I'll open it up. Yeah, no support there, sorry. So this is the type of material we're talking, roughly. We're gonna change it slightly, but this is the idea. So we have a pattern that kind of repeats on the horizontal and the vertical axes. So that's the idea here. Let's try to get close to that. So if you have in mind, or keep in mind, that 90% of everything you do in Substance Designer is essentially making a height map, and through that also creating some sort of clipping mask that simply says yes or no, or kinda two things, if you boil it down to its essence, then it's probably best to start off with some sort of gradient, because every individual tile has a bit of a slant going on. So this shape right now probably doesn't cut it. But again, it was just a placeholder note to begin with. So let's boot up some sort of gradient. So hit spacebar and hit gradient. I'll type it in, and then let the preview do its magic, and then you see, okay, maybe this could do the trick, because again, keep in mind, and if you look at the slides that we provide on Brightspace, what does white mean? What does black mean? Black means no. White means yes, do the elevation. So if we just replace the placeholder node with this one, by holding on Shift, we can relink a noodle, if you will. Let go, and now we have a bit of a slant going on. So that's a solid foundation. You can adjust a few things. So let's get rid of the old one. Double click, tiling. So now we have a stair, if you will. Rotation, you can change that. But none of that is needed. So this is the foundation. And the second part of a tile is another gradient. So gradient linear 3 is essentially the same as linear 2, but a bit more contrasty. And obviously we can get the same result by just feeding in some sort of levels node in here. So if I boot up the other one, gradient 3, the difference here is essentially just a levels node, where we are tightening up this, and maybe somewhat in the center here, ish. So we don't need the third one. This one, however, because if we think of this as a tile, probably does need some rotation. So we head over to rotation and set it to 90 degrees. And now we want a more slanted tile. So if I relink this, this is what we have right now. Not great, not awful, but could be better. So we want to actually use this gradient to tell this gradient to have a slant. So we do that by just making some sort of blend material, by putting up a blend node here, and then we feed that into the foreground. And obviously, because blend nodes are essentially Photoshop, it's just rendering the foreground node now, since the blend mode is set to copy. So this is just, hey, this is a layer in Photoshop, and this is another one on top. But the blend node right now doesn't really do much. The only thing we can do right now is change opacity, and will only ever affect the foreground. So only gradient linear 1. But we want this to be subtracted from this. So we tell the blend node to set the blending mode to subtract. Now it's subtracting, so it's saying yes, do subtract where it's white from this shape. Therefore, we're getting a bit of a like this sort of shape around the edges here. And then we can say, hey, how much of this do we want? Yes, all of it, or none of it, or some of it. So this is more a gut feeling kind of thing. Like, yeah, maybe this could be the basis. And yeah, that's the hardest bit, I suppose. So then right after this, and we can always go back and tweak this, obviously, we will bump up the detail by providing some sort of tile generator. We can obviously use the most sophisticated one, but since we only need to tile this a few times, we don't need a tile sampler, because a tile sampler is like the thing on steroids. It does everything. It's a bit over the top. So just use a very old pretty much the first tile generator there was in Designer, called the tile generator grayscale. So we're just going to relink this here and then put this into pattern 1. And obviously we get this. So that's great. It does provide some details here, some means of changing the randomness to the grayscale. So you have different heights. So this could be a city. I don't know. None of this is required though. So just reset this. And first thing we do is we change the pattern to image input. So whatever image is being fed into this, which happens to be our tile, is being fed in here, and then we tile this many times, 10 by 10. And this is also a bit over the top, so maybe 5 by 7. Or maybe the other way around, 7 by 5. Yeah, this is better. And coming back to the height scale, because I think it's a bit too much. Materials, default, edit properties, and then find height scale. Lower this down. And this is doing a lot for us. So next thing that we want to do is we don't want to increase the gap between every single tile. And we can maybe try to get that done in the tile generator, but I want to do that at the foundation. So somewhere between gradient linear 2 and blend, we just feed in some levels node. Then we can tighten up how this is rendered. So if you take a closer look here, and we stop playing with the values, this just makes it tighter. This makes it less so. And you just play around, and you can get some interesting shapes. So maybe you don't want to touch this part of the histogram. A bit like that, maybe. And you can play with how gray the grayish gray can be, and how black the blackest black is. And then we're getting other different results. So really do try to fix these things at the core, because then you can always go back to the beginning, make a change, and everything follows through. If you have a billion nodes that do corrections, then you also need to change all of them if you want a simple change. So that is a bit more destructive. So go back to the core, get it fixed, and then move on. Maybe. Yeah, this is okay for now. We can always go back. Not bad, not shabby, too shabby at the very least. Maybe it's actually somewhat shabby. Okay, cool. Less shabby. Okay, next thing in line is, if you look at the references here, we have some sort of line that is being passed along or passed through on the horizontal level. And that is currently missing here. So some sort of line that does that. Not great. So what we need is some new kind of slant, if you will. And the beautiful thing is that everything is kind of based on itself. Patterns repeat. So do establish the mindset of trying to go back and doing the same thing or doing similar things with nodes you already have established. So as opposed to being like, if I want to get a line here, copy everything. No. Just borrow. Beautiful thing, again, I can only repeat myself, is that once you change this, everything follows through. And if this is the foundation for multiple aspects of your material, then hey, you're shooting multiple birds with a bullet. If you really despise these birds, then shoot them. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so we're going to establish another tile generator, and this is maybe the biggest disadvantage of setting this up this way, because then we have 2 tile generators, and those live in isolation. So that's not great, but I couldn't find a better way. So we want to feed this in here, and then fix the X and Y amount. If you double click on the tile generator here, we have an X amount of 7 and 5. So we want to line that up. So lower this to 7, 5. I think this is the more important one. In the X amount, you see that there's some lines popping up in the preview. So set that to 1, then you don't have that weird line. So now, if we combine this, so after this tile generator, the other one that we created before, we get a blend and put that on top. And then we find a blend mode that we maybe can use. Try to treat this as Bob Ross, so happy accidents. See what they do. Learn about the blending modes. Sometimes it is a happy accident. Sometimes it's also good to kind of know what you are in fact doing. Nope. Max Lighten probably. Maybe. This might also be the moment where you're like, hey, maybe this is the right one, but the way this is slanted is the wrong way around. So maybe we want to invert the grayscale here. So we just feed in a node in between. Ooh. Let's see. Maybe a different min dark. No, then it vanishes entirely. Okay, getting somewhere here. Getting somewhere. Woo. So this also just happened to me by accident, because I would have used a different blend mode and played with the black and grayscale values of this one by maybe feeding in another levels node and just getting that to be a bit more average looking. So maybe like this. We could still do this. So the most important aspect is that we don't want to lose the shape of the tile, and that we want to get some sort of connecting line, some connecting tissue between every individual tile here. So do that. And if you're like, hey, why do we have to invert grayscale here? Levels node, a levels node, has the histogram. So instead of introducing another node, which takes time and therefore reduces performance, we can just get rid of it. And then this levels node, we just invert. We just tell this distribution of grayscale values to be inverted. So we simply tell the blackest black to be white now, and the whitest white to be black now. No, the blackest black to be white, and the whitest white to be black. It's not a sentence I say every day, so forgive me. Yeah. So we just flip the histogram, and then we play. Not Genshin Impact, not Fortnite, but we play with this instead, and then get some gratification out of that, hopefully. Cool. This is turning out to be somewhat readable as a roof, even from a distance. Most people would be like, this is definitely not cobblestone. So hey, we're at least in the right ballpark. Cool. Let's go back here, maybe tweak the blending, a bit more bulky, better. Now it actually gets the illusion across that this is being like stuck underneath the other tile, which is obviously totally a some sort of illusion, because there is no inside on a height map. But hey, from a distance, it holds up. Cool. There's another thing that kind of starting to annoy me a bit, is that the reflectiveness, or the lack of roughness, therefore glossiness. So we head over to the roughness here and just say, hey, yes, make it rough, therefore white. And black would be like, no, not rough at all, therefore very glossy. So almost as if it has been raining. Cool. Never go full rough, because nothing is ever fully rough. There's just a handful of materials out there, and certainly it isn't a roof tile that is perfectly rough. Cool. What else do we need? Oh, what can we do? Oh yeah, right. Looking at this again. Maybe it's not all that obvious from this reference, but if you get different ones and you zoom in a bit, there's a bit of a push around this edge. So every single tile has a bit of a directional shift into this direction here. So over here, there. So how can we tell Substance Designer to push in this aspect a bit into up, essentially, even though there is no up on here, but the illusion is that this is the way up would be. We're going to be creative here, and we need yet another tile generator for that. And then we're going to use a directional warp. So a directional warp node can, as the name suggests, warp something into a certain direction based on an input. And if we keep black and white in mind, and white meaning yes, do it, and black means don't do it, then maybe we can utilize that. So let's see. A new tile generator, and we want to use the levels here, or at least the gradient linear. If you haven't used a levels, that's also fine, then use this instead. But in this case, this is the last one in line, so we're just going to feed that in and change the image input. Perfect. And now we want to line it up with the amount we have on the y-axis. So double check y amount is 5, so line that up, 5. And we are getting that line again. We're going to reduce the other amount to... oops, I was mistaken though the axis here. There. That's the correct... No, is it? No, it's 7. Excuse me. 7. Yeah, I was calling this the y-axis, but it's actually the x amount because we're tiling this horizontally. So obviously it's not up, it's horizontally aligned. So it's the x axis. Everyone does make mistakes, including me. Happens very rarely, but it does happen. Okay, we want to now push this area wherever it says, yeah, push it please, because this is white, means, hey, push into a direction. So right after this blend node, where everything so far came together, we're going to be putting a directional warp. Now nothing is happening. And if you have a look at the directional warp specific parameters here, we have an intensity. So set that to 0, and the effect later on is going to be so much more nicer. And then the warp angle, you have to line that up, because in what direction do we actually want to warp things? And obviously it's going to be 90 degrees. So up. Then, if you have a closer look here, this is the intensity input. We already established that. So that goes in here. Perfect. Nothing happens because we lowered the intensity, but now look what happens if we increase it. Whoa. Things start to move up. And obviously you're getting some averaging of the few pixels we have and the few triangles. So if you come over to display and wireframe, you see, hey, it certainly isn't magic. It's trying its best to tessellate as well as it can, but there's only so much it can do. But there's a fix for that. It's kind of chaotic and a bit crazy, the fix for this, but there's one that is very costly called tessellation factor. So for your height map, and in Unity you have your shader settings, you can also increase that, and then just say like, hey, give me more. So if you have a look at the wireframe now, it's so dense that you cannot even see it unless you get really close. So usually you want to have the best result on tessellation factor 1, so the actual mesh, the wireframe of the actual mesh. Only in certain circumstances you want to increase this, because this is doubling the amount. Like, hey, give me double the amount now, 16 times the detail. And Todd Howard would certainly be proud, but please refrain from using this as much as you can. So we're going to fix this in a second, but also the warping itself is not really all that intense, and it ends at 1. And do try this in the future. Whenever you have a node that ends at a certain value, just override it. Just say like, 500. Bam! And you're like, whoa, this is art. And then you want to lower it down. It's a bit like music production and compression, right? At first you have some compression, you're like, yeah, this is great. And then next morning you listen to it, like, whoa, what the hell was I thinking? Same here. Don't overdo it. Look at the height map here. Does that hold up? Yeah. And then let's fix this. And the fix is insane, because who in their right mind would blur everything? But we will, because we're not in our right mind. So blur HQ grayscale. Now everything is butter. So perfect, ship it. Now, obviously just joking, you want to lower the intensity. And this kind of mitigates the effect of it not being able to hold up. So if we have a look at the wireframe here, just lower the intensity, it's like, It's trying to smooth it out, and then, hey, this is actually better now. Does it hold up from a distance? Yeah. So one thing I don't like is that it's also being pushed to the back, including pretty much everything. So maybe we want to change this a bit by getting a levels node in between here. And before we hit the directional warp, and then we double click the directional warp, click levels once, so we can see the result of another node while only affecting the previous one. Now we want to play with this. Maybe this is better. Play with this as much as you can. I think it's slightly better. And then I'll go back to blend the amount. There's levels. I'm just going to reduce the amount here a bit. I'll maybe play with this a bit. Starting to go somewhere. What else can we do? Maybe this. Or maybe a different blend mode, max lighten. Oh yeah, that's much better. Although, is it? Maybe not. I think actually I do like switch better. And this is, there's no manual for this, not really. You just see what looks best. Until you're happy and then you clap your hands. Okay. Not flawless. Cannot put my finger on it right now. There's something about it that I don't like. But hard to tell what it is. So always be very mindful with leveling things in and out, especially those values, because that is just limiting everything. So now you're cranking it up and then you have a white out. And then obviously it cannot get more white than white. Therefore, we're plateauing here. This is very straight because it cannot get any straighter, if that's a word. But yeah, we have something we can maybe work with. Maybe less. It's a bit intense. What if I switch this? What happens visually? Just an experiment. This makes no sense. So I think it was a good call. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's much better. Okay, so it was this level to know that was a bit too suboptimal. The amount of slanting that is put on top of the final render here, the blend between the original tile generator and the second one, that needed some tidying up, and now we have a better looking distribution and a better connection, and it doesn't look as forced. And maybe the H. So you might be like, "Oh man, don't do it this fast, Max. Please stop it." This is your life now. Like you go back, you're like, tweak it. Like, oh yeah, chef's kiss. There it is. Imagine having to do this in Photoshop manually. Okay, cool. I think we're done with the tile generation here. And this is maybe a bit of an odd analogy. And if you're really not into sound production or sound design, the closest thing to this is probably subtractive synthesis, where you start off with a sound, usually coming from some sort of oscillator. I know it's just an analogy, but maybe for those that get it, do get it and appreciate that analogy, So this is essentially our synthesis. And everything that follows after this is just subtracting from that. Because people love wear and tear. So next thing that I usually do is either tackle the roughness over here to just make it tell some sort of story. Or alternatively, we add some scratches and some dirt and that kind of stuff. Usually that's done through the normal map, and dirt would probably be just the color. And color is something I treat last, or as the last little resort. So over here, let's just add some scratches. So this one can go to the side. Let's find something that could be cool. Grunge maps. There's lots of them. Oh, that's maybe the wrong one. So you want to spawn a few. Grunge map 01. Just see how that would actually translate into a normal map. Now it's also time to save because my PC is getting a bit slow. Yeah, desktop, obviously. Roof. There. So if we translate that into a normal map, you cannot just, you can obviously put this in here, but then you lose all the normal map detail from your roof. So this goes in here, and we better leave it like that. Because without the normal map, just look at this, how little it translates, especially if lighting is moving. So we need the normal map to really convey the shape. Height map is great, but it really needs normal map. They're best buddies. They need each other. Okay, so we need to convert this into another normal map. So just, hey, normal. Make it normal, please. Just don't be odd. Then we play with OpenGL and DirectX because that flips the X, not the X, but the Y axis. So sometimes you get the impression like, hey, this is going in, and obviously chipping and wear and tear on a roof would probably be chipping away and not adding to it. So it looks like, hey, there's a bump. It makes little to no sense unless we're talking, I don't know, bird poop. But probably you don't need a normal map for that. Okay, so move this over, and then intensity is, by default, you probably have it way too intense. So 10, like, yeah! So let's test this, and we want to combine those two. And there's literally a mode called normal combine. Put that on top. Normal 1, normal 2. Couldn't be easier. Now they're combined. You can always come back and then just dial in the amount. And yes, you've heard this phrase before, but less is more. Even this is probably too much. Yeah. You might be like, no, but what? Juicy detail. Yes, you build these things up. It's not just one grunge map done. That's just lazy. So you want to build up some detail here. Maybe another one, because we can combine as many as we want. And that's why you get these behemoths of Substance Designer graphs that it look like someone just vomited onto the screen. Because you blend, and then you blend some more, and then you're like, wow, I'm having a splendid day here. You'd keep on doing that all day. So maybe another one, grunge map. Got the little previews here. Grunge map 08 is a classic. That's some nice and juicy detail. Can be like, sure, just play with this. Maybe just some scratches here, inverted. So white means yes, do the thing. So convert this into yet another normal. Now we have some wear and tear on these spots there. And then another normal combine. You could even be like, hey, I want a normal blend. So blend is essentially a normal combine, but now you have a mask input. You can say like, hey, the foreground, only show it in specific areas. So that's the main difference. That's why we don't need it. At least not yet. So a normal combine. Oop. I did it again. Sorry for wasting your time. Normal combine. Background into the normal map. This one on top. So before and after. Maybe increase the detail or the amount a bit more. Find a spot where we actually get some of that juicy detail. It's probably over here. There. Whoa. Like this is some serious chipping. maybe want some directional detail, because usually these tiles have some sort of lines that go down. We can be very boring and use an anisotropic noise. These are lines. And then we rotate it. And maybe like that. And this is very obvious. So once converted into a normal map, we are getting lines. Wow. So after this, a normal combine, this is gonna be horrible, by the way, and you already know it. Yeah. It ain't great, but it's honest work. Maybe before this thing hits the thing, we're gonna blend it. We're gonna take away from it. So I feed this into the foreground, because if we have a mask, we do have a mask in a second, it only takes away from the foreground. So the background we don't even have to feed. So we just hold on shift and move it to the foreground, and then we just take away maybe a Gaussian noise or something. So again, black means don't really interfere, and this means, yeah, do. So no. So now we're getting spots where this is less severe. So now there's these spots where, hey, the lines do not show all that much. And then we can play with the scale. Maybe you want to have a look, disorder a bit, just a bit randomness. So over here, these lines will be a bit more visible, as you can see. And over here, they won't. And again, you can put the levels in there and, excuse me, and tweak this to perfection. There's a better note for, because I am a victim of that. I tend to just put the levels in between things to quickly tighten things up. Sometimes that's not needed. There's other notes. They're called histogram. So you would feed in a histogram. There's histogram range, which is perfect for just making things a bit more uniform. But we want to tidy things up. So histogram scan it is. And if you really want to increase that, the tidiness of thing, histogram select. Because now you see like, whoa, this is essentially histogram select, because it has a certain selection of your histogram and it just cycles through that. So in a nutshell, what it does this and then moves those three at the same time to either the left or the right. Whereas a histogram range is essentially tidying up this on the bottom here and then just moving where the main focus is. And a histogram scan is very similar to a histogram select, but it doesn't affect the bottom here. And it's less tight, and it moves those, as opposed to the one in the center or like all three at the same time. So that's the difference. It's just a quick way of getting levels, but then more control and less control at the same time, but certainly much faster in rendering time. And that can be beneficial if you have like massive substance files, substance graphs that are becoming some sort of undefeatable demon. So you want to have the least amount. So over here, we have these lines wherever it's white-ish, and then some spots don't really have that. And that gives us some perceivable variety that the human mind likes and considers to be realistic, in quotation marks. We can play with the smoothness here. Always go back. Don't even know what that does, to be honest. That's the thing. You don't need to know about everything you do. Just, hey, does it look cool? Yeah. Cool. Maybe a few more spots, and I don't like the intensity here. So the blend also, we can dial in the amount. Less in general. So you would want to miss this if it would be gone, but you don't really want to see it. There. That's much better. Cool. I think we're done with our normal map stuff. You can add more. You can you can lose yourself in making a perfect normal map, and that is for you to do. So just frame this normal. Normal people do normal things. And one thing I forgot, I tend to make the last few bits somewhat green. Those are our final outputs, and we can always move them. So next thing is probably, ask yourself when it comes to metallicness, is this metal? No, so just don't do it. Could even go as far as like saying that 2K is a bit much. What I tend to do is just come over to the base parameters here and say output size absolute, and then no, absolutely not, man. Just lower this down to 64 pixels. So now, because why would you render more than this? You could even go as like this, because nodes tile. So if you hit spacebar, you see a preview of the tiling. Why do you need more pixels for just black? I tend to just use 64 because rendering-wise, there's barely a difference, and it just doesn't feel as insane. And then through a gradient map, I put that in between, and then relative to parent, I bump this up. This still is faster than just having this render at 2K. So we end up with 2K again. Doesn't really make a huge difference anymore these days, but can be cool. I mean, this is at least some optimization you have in mind, which is always appreciated. All right, so where are we? Let's tackle roughness now. What are the exposed parameters when you think about it? This kind of material. What are they? What will they be? What's most likely to be somewhat useful later on? It's probably the tiling of this, and then we can already expose that if we want to, and that is done in the first. Well, it's going to be tough, right? Because we have a tile generator here and another one here, and all of them have to be exposed, and then you have to line them up. So I'm not even going to bother with this material. Maybe it's the worst example, actually, but okay, let's not expose any of that then, because if we just ignore the problem, it isn't there, right? That's how we treat things at CMGT. So let's add water. There's a node called leak, grunge leaks, leaky paint. Let's have a look. That looks like running water. So then we close base parameters down, because most of the time you don't really deal with any of that. So keep in mind that black means no, therefore glossy. So everything that's black now is going to be water, and everything that's white isn't. That's a bit of a mind-bending moment, but that's just how it works. In Unity, the standard shader, doesn't even work with roughness. It uses smoothness, which is inverted roughness, because that is more intuitive. So white we associate with more reflectiveness, and black means like no reflection. But with roughness, it's the opposite of it, like the vice versa. And that can be a bit tough for the mind, but you get used to it. Okay, if we put that into roughness here, then whoa. It's very smooth. It certainly has been raining, because most of the surface is, in fact, black, therefore glossy. And we have some aspects here, some regions where it's mostly white. That is over here. Whoop. There's barely any reflections, just a bit. And this is not how water would work, because water would probably accumulate between the crevices, between every single tile, and not on top, because that's where it's floating down, right? Water floats down. What a revelation. Wow. So we want to find those spots and define them. And we can do that through an edge detect, because we do have this here. So the task for now is to find these spots over here, so that we can tell this quote-unquote water to only show between the tiles. So maybe one of the more contrasty ones is this one. Does this change tremendously? Yeah, kinda. So maybe this is the perfect mask for that. So we want first to have what it is by default. So white means nope, not reflective. So that's on top. and want to put that in or blend that in whenever it's this area. So we need a mask for that. And when it isn't, use this one. So blend node it is, and that goes on top. So everything now is white, meaning it's not glossy. And now we want to tell through a mask, through opacity input, that, hey, only show this where it's between the tiles. So I mentioned a edge detect. So let's get this, the one that we mentioned earlier, and then run this into an edge detect. Now it's trying to detect the edges as implied by the name. Let's move this over here. There, and then play with the values here. Nope. Invert, that's perfect, because white means yes, show it. Black means don't. Tolerance, and that's usually a slider that's left alone. And we can play with this until this popping happens. Then we notice that it's really harsh, like you see all these jagged edges. We don't want that. So what we do is either we find a better output, not output, excuse me, an input. So maybe this one instead, if it's more blurry, or maybe less so. So the edge detect works a bit more in our favor. But we need this slant, this pushing in the warped direction, the directionness, if that's a word, of this bit over here. So we cannot really use anything else as an input. So let's use that. And then for now, just get this in. And then, because we did invert this, means, hey, don't do the thing, therefore make it glossy on top. But we actually want the opposite. So we hit invert. Now we have water between the crevices here. Whoa. This is how water would accumulate. And then you could expose this. You could be exposing this parameter as, hey, water. Wait a sec, it would be the other way around. So this is a bit of an issue. So probably want to invert this. And then if we were to now, because the train of thought I just had is essentially that if you expose a parameter, you want to move a slider to the right, and that means give me more, and not the other way around. Because it would be like, hey, more water, and that's how you name your exposed parameter, and then you have to move the slider down or like to the left to get more. That is a bit counterintuitive. So that's why I'm inverting this. And then the moment you lower this down, everything becomes white. It's like, yeah, now it's all very non-glossy, so no water. Then if you expose this balance slider here of our grunge leaks, then we're getting water slowly. So then it has been raining. So let's do just that. Click, expose as new graph input. And the identifier is things you can access via code, so you don't need to tackle that. But this is the important bit. For artists that want to use these substances in Unity, or even designers, they need to know what this actually does and what's the intention behind it. So that would be water amount. Then I tend to group things. So I just call this rain, because then we get a nice little category once we expose this that we can open up. It's called rain, and then we have a water amount slide or slider. And then we have a default value. So let's make this not wet at all by default. And there's a max. And we don't want to change the minimum or max here. We want to go either none or all in. So just hit OK. Now to test this exposed parameter, we just double click into the void. And then we have a bit of an overview over here. The parameters, you can still open up and tweak them. You can make this an angle, a function, a color. Maybe that could be cool. Like, yeah, no, give me water. But we wanted this to be a slider. And then preview. Now we have a little category. This is how it would look in Unity or Unreal Engine. You open up the graph in that engine and then water amount. And you can... And even a fool would understand what's going on. Water amount. And it nicely builds up. Look how it wiggles for you as well. Wow. So there's another thing I want to do to this mask, because it really only accumulates now around here where it's not white. So maybe you want to break off the mask a bit so water can at least partly be on top of here. So it's been slowly leaking down. So we do that by feeding another blend node in between. And then we can maybe use the grunge leaks again. So on top of that, let's see what happens. Now we play with linear dodge. No. Cycle through. Now it's even less waterly on top. Multiply. Hell no. Nope. Min darken. Nope, that destroys everything we worked on. No. Oh, actually, this is pretty cool. But no. Overlay? No. Screen? No. Soft light? No. You know why? Because this is so white, it won't get any whiter, so we don't really see the effects. So this one we probably have to invert. So in between this and this, we just invert things. And then play with the blend modes again. Copy. Add. No. Okay. Now we're talking a bit. But we get rid of all that juicy stuff. Okay, my mind is going places right now. This happens to the best of us. I'm certainly the best of us. I'm not. Cool. Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted. So inverted this, and now black means water can be there, and then on these spots there's some water that hasn't been fully going down from its destination, and then it kind of merges with the rest of the water. Where's actually that spot? It's on the bottom here. Fourth from, okay, that's the one. And well, you could also increase that, maybe a different blend mode, find one that is even more severe looking. Doesn't even get more severe than that, so it would require yet another probably histogram scan to just tidy that up. Yeah. Now we're talking. Now we're like, yeah, water. This is all the water from Majora on top of this. Cool. And then, because this is becoming some sort of cascading stairway, looks like a Dutch trap. It's like a death trap. So we're just gonna click this thing and dock it. So hit D, we can just dock this. Like, hey, this is just stuff, corrective stuff. We don't need to see it. If you want to undock, just click it and hit D again to undock. So it could even be like, hey, all of this, just dock it. Eventually you have, you think like, wow, how did I get this result with only 3 nodes? No. Haha. The magic is hidden. Cool. Yeah, so now, because we did that at the core of Grunge Leaks, feeding that in before all comes together, the slider hasn't changed. So this is still the amount. Nothing falls apart. Nothing's like, oh no, now this thing doesn't change if I move the slider. No. This is not something we did after the blending, but we did it in the beginning before it hits the blend node. And that's great, because again, now this still works. Lots of water. And eventually water all came all the way down. So maybe you actually want to limit the amount to this, so there's always at least some water that's still on top of them. And we can go back to the parameters here and say, hey, rain can only be a max of 0.96. Now, whatever you do, you can never go beyond that. So it can never be fully dry on top of these roofs or these tiles. Nice. Cool. Let's wrap this up by giving everything a bit of color. And we're not going to be super lazy here, but some red. And again, we don't want to live here. Neither do we want to live in black and white, because those values simply don't exist. So we don't even use them, obviously. We want to live over here. This is where most of coloring of the albedo or diffuse maps or base colors live. Those are the most convincing one. And usually things are a bit less saturated than you would want it. So over here, maybe there. Let's have a look at the reference. Oh man, I mean, The Witcher 3 is somewhat famous for being overly colorful. I remember the original E3 trailer that they showed. Everything looked so Hollywood. It was much less saturated. It looked better in my opinion. But now then, as a final little thing, they just emphasized the saturation for everything, and I was never happy with that. But that's what it is. So I guess, oh no, not that much. But here. And I don't think we're getting close to the actual The Witcher 3 thing. This is not really nailing it, but hey, some reference is better than none. As a last thing, we want to add some dirt. Dirt where there is essentially everywhere. We could even be like, hey, let's add some moss, but let's not get ahead of ourselves here. So we need a color for dirt. Don't make it black. Make it, I don't know, dark red, or maybe give it a bit of a dirty kind of feel, maybe there. And albedo colors, you don't want to get them too dark. So again, albedo is just another word for base color, a name that I got accustomed to. You can test this if you're like, hey, this is maybe too dark. I don't know. I don't have a feeling. I know the slides that they showed us that says like, hey, don't make it too dark for your color. How do I check? There's a PBR albedo safe color node. So you can feed in either your metallic, like, hey, is this scientifically accurate? Just feed it in and it tells you like, nah. And this is so far fine, apparently. And you can switch, I mean, don't use diffuse specular. This is just a different workflow. Use base color metallic and then lower the tolerance. You're like, no, let's not tolerate anything. If you're like, yeah, I mean, if you set this to 1, then why did you even boot this up? Because you're just ignoring it, essentially. If you lower this to 0, 0 tolerance, so you're going to be the Judge Dredd of substances, like, no prisoners. If I just demonstrate this, if we get this too dark, see what happened? Like, black. Albedo safe color is like, no, there's no black, so make it gray. So if you say like, well, we're just going to tolerate it, and even then it's like, no. Even then, no black. So, but this is a safe color. This is scientifically the blackest black things ought to be. Not this, right? Come on, just, even if you're not an artist, black is a no-go. White is a no-go. Well, white is actually fine, I guess. It really doesn't happen in real life either, so please treat white as, like, no white. So find something in between. And I tend to just remove this afterwards. It's just a checking thing, just a checker-upper. Too dark still. There, maybe here. Cool. So this is our dirt color for now. I haven't tested it, but it's probably gonna be fine. So PBR safe color, no tolerance. Actually gets a bit less saturated, as you can see. Okay. I guess. There. Are you happy now, science? There. Cool. So how do we get dirt? We have to, again, use some sort of mask to show this color everywhere where there's no dirt, and this color where there is dirt. What about just looking for it? Dirt. Whoa. There's dirt. According to science, this is dirt. Cool. Blend this. Bloop. And use this as a mask. Whoa. We have dirt. You can play with the scale. Disorder. You know what? I like it so much, but I lower the intensity of this so it blends in nicer or nicely. Just some specks of dirt. Ever so slightly. These things go a long way. because it has been exposed to wear and tear and the weather. If it's the Dutch weather, then Jesus Christ, have mercy on this little roof tile's soul. Yeah, why not? Now everything is a bit more shit, which means, yeah, great. We love that stuff. Maybe you don't, deep down you don't, but as a surface artist, you are supposed to like this stuff now. This is your life. Cool, things coming together, maybe a bit more ambient occlusion, just ever so slightly. Yeah, this is still fine, but now we have a bit more contrast. Nice. But this is just dirt that is on top of everything. If we want dirt only to accumulate between those, then we can use a similar trick we used on the roughness map here, where we have an edge detect, but we're going to use a dirt generator. Come over to this little blob over here that just says dirt. And this is a bit much. You might be like, you know what? Nah. Enough learning for today. No. We don't back down. We don't give up. So hit dirt. And the only thing that this wants and needs is the first two. So it needs an ambient occlusion and a curvature. The ambient occlusion we already have. So why not just feed that in here? You're just saying, whoop, done. Now it's already like, hey, based on the ambient occlusion, I do find where things are. But a curvature will help it so much more. So a curvature node is essentially just a converter node that converts something into, well, most people refer to it as the borderlines look. So if we boot up a curvature, it says, hey, normal, the color node. So it wants our normal map and then gives us some sort of output that we can then feed into our curvature input here of our dirt generator. So let's do just that. We have all the combined normal map stuff. So hey, easy. There. Now it's like, yeah, I do find edges now. I do find the details. And if you crank up, you can be like, yeah, does this help? And maybe all this little detail is not really needed to determine where dirt can be. It's a bit intense. So we can circumvent this by going back to a different normal map where we didn't have all that vertical line stuff. So let's just use this one instead. So from here, and the curvature is like, yeah, this is more than enough. Could even be as drastic as going back here or to the very first one. This might actually be enough. Let's use this for now. And then feed this in. And now, whoa, we have a mask that looks amazing. This is so, excuse my French, it's so sexy. So after we used the already existing nodes curvature. No, this didn't exist, but based on the normal map, we have a new curvature map now. And that goes in here in the ambient occlusion. After this, we will have another blend of, yes, we want to pass along this as the background, but we want another type of dirt on top. We're just going to copy this. Control C and Control V, you know this shortcut from Windows or pretty much any tool out there. Maybe make it somewhat dark. And because just this color as dirt is really, really not very interesting to look at. What I tend to do is I just boot up a black and white spots. So B&W spots 03 looks somewhat generic. But if we blend this together, and this will happen, be like, hey, you fed in some color map and this is grayscale. I cannot combine grayscale maps or outputs that go into an either or input when you first established, or in the beginning you did establish some sort of color map here. So we either can do this first. Now this is probably still giving us an issue. Yeah, it can't work. So what we do is we just select this dotted line here and then just feed in a gradient map. Because a gradient map, not only does it redo colors for us using the color picker here, where we can reassign all the colors on a histogram, which is very useful in most cases, or in many cases. It also converts from either color to grayscale or vice versa. So we can be like, hey, this is a color map now. Even though it doesn't look like color, it is treated as such. So instead of using just 256 what grayscale values, is using 16.7 million colors. It's a bit extensive, but otherwise it wouldn't work. And now we just put this on top of this and blend it. So we blend those two together to get more interesting dirt. And at least on Windows, you can just click and cycle through those blend modes. Used to work on Mac too. Stopped working. Very annoying. There. Don't make it too dark, because remember PVR, it doesn't like darkness. Cool. This goes here, a bit more structured, and then this goes into the foreground. Now everything is super, super dirty. And then we use this sexy mother flipper here. Put that in. And now we have dirt everywhere where this mask allows for it. Wow! Double click, lower the water here. Isn't this nice? I mean, it's dirty, therefore we like it. It makes no sense, but that's what it is. So let's come back to the dirt, and then we have some procedural parameters, because deep down, if you come over to the dirt and you say like, hey, what is actually happening under the hood? Open reference. Right-click this, open reference. This is what's happening. And someone has been framing this really poorly. But this is essentially a substance within a substance that does the work for you. Okay, just in case you want to know. And now we can tackle this. Double-click here, go back, click it once, and then tackle the mask and see, okay, how much do we want this mask to actually affect anything? Yeah. This is nice. Edge masking. No edge masking then, because this is exactly where dirt would be, and also we like the darkness here. Grunge scale, can lower that down. Does that translate? View outputs in 3D. Yeah, it looks really good. Now we lost our height scale, so go back in here. Just whoop. Whoa. If you deliver something like this, I will find you, and I won't do bad things. I will be like, I will just nod. Don't say a word. It's going to be very awkward for the both of us. But I do appreciate the effort. So I would bow and nod to myself, but I can't, so I won't. Cool. I think this is where we wrap it up. Again, you can optimize this further, but now we also have a very nice looking water slider. It's a slider, not slider. The T is silent, so water slider. There. Perfect. Using the rasterizer, does this look more sexy? I doubt it. Interesting, we're getting some issues that we're not gonna tackle now. So, probably we should. And I will. So, because why would I leave you when you need it the most? So, we do tell it to have water here. So, what about we tell this roughness that it cannot be rough over here? So there's another sexy node that's called shadows. So if we have this one, we can be like, hey, feed this into a shadows node. So this generates, as the name suggests, shadows. So just bump that up. Sample size, maybe edge softness, no. So this is just generating some sort of shadow underneath a thing, and you can already see where this is going. We are creating or abusing this node to create some sort of mask. Like, no, don't be wet over here. So maybe histogram select to just tidy up. Contrast there. Yeah, kinda. So this is a mask for our roughness here, which we haven't even named as such. So let's frame this. Roughness. I tend to call this rough stuff because I'm so fun. I'm so fun at parties, and I'm a millennial, so my dad jokes are through the roof, quite fittingly. There. So yeah, it can be very wet right now, which is not cool. So we want to take away from that by blending this yet again. and then using this and moving that into the mask input. And now it can only be where this is. Do I have the right mindset for this? No, I don't, because this is the foreground. This was supposed to go into the background here. And then we say, hey, no. And this doesn't work at all, which is really cool. So let's see. Let's cycle through until we find something that makes that little spot white. So this is probably very white. Oop. And then we find a means to get that section. Huh. Yeah, the shadows are getting cast down, which is not great. So if I move this and just never go above that. We can do this in a very dirty fashion using a transformation 2D node and just move things up a bit. It's so hacky. So now we're like, nah, move this up until it's like, nope. Also, it's not very white. Let's find the one that makes it even more severe. Yeah. I'm just going to use a levels node at this point. There. And then. There. You probably can get the same result using a histogram scan. But, I mean, here we are. This one needs to go more up. We just move it. So now it's there. You can blur this a bit more. So yeah, you hack your way through this until it kind of does the job. And this blend mode is... Now it's actually being on top. We want to remove this. And blending white on top of everything else is always tough because it just doesn't really work all that well in most cases. If I invert this and we don't even use a mask, we just put this into the background. This one goes on top. Yeah. Okay, at like max lighten is probably the one. Yeah, okay, took a while, but hey, better than before. So we just added another half hour to this tutorial. Oh well. We are living for better results, so perfect. Another expose parameter you probably want to think about is the amount of dirt. So the dirt level is like, hey, no dirt, or almost no, because there's at least some dirt. And then you expose this as dirt amount. I tend to call things amount, and you call this dirty mother flipper. Double click into the void, and then we have dirty mother flipper, and then we can just dial that in. Yeah, no water, but all the dirt. Maybe you also want to limit that because that is ridiculous. Maybe I mean, this is probably as much as it can be. You go back and say max is, I'm only 39 years old, but max this time needs to be 80. Perfect. Preview this. All the water and all the dirt. Almost all of it. And then you ship it. And you nod at your art teacher. And they might nod back. Or nod. Haha. Okay, thanks everyone for your attention, and good luck substancing, if that's a word. Bye-bye!